The town is agog over the Sixers and bringing in Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers and a really good coaching staff. And the one guy that I was like, I hope he's around because he's so busy and he does such a great job. He's the preeminent reporter in the NBA. When it comes to the NBA and basketball, I mean, there's only one name that matters. It's it. When it comes to getting all your information, he is the fabulous Woj on the Comcast Business Hotline. What's up, brother?
Hey, Cuz, how are you? How are you?
We're good. We're having some fun here because you could see it was very disappointing as what transpired toward last year, and then when COVID hits and they kind of flamed out. And so this move really breathed a lot of life back into the fan base.
Yeah, listen, this is, across the board, it's a dramatic transformation for the organization. You mentioned, obviously, the hiring of Doc Rivers and now Daryl Morey coming in to run the entire basketball operations. And so Philadelphia has tried to get him in the past. A couple of years ago, they made a run at him, and Daryl essentially leveraged it into a new deal in Houston, but he escaped that deal here at the end of the season and really right away went to work with Philly pretty quickly and getting a deal together, and they're finalizing that now, just a language in the contract, and I'm told they're going to announce it formally here pretty quickly.
Woj, what does it mean that when Daryl Morey comes in to run your franchise with all the contacts and relationships that he has?
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about this yesterday, and what you'll never really hear from Daryl is talking about his culture, or I don't want to say he doesn't care about any of that, but he really doesn't care about any of that. He is going to gather talent, and that's always been his mission in Houston. And you look at all the big deals he was involved in, and he does a lot of small deals to try to build toward the big deals and getting the kinds of assets. But I think right now he's got two players in Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons that, when you're a rival GM, you covet getting players like that. Well, they have them, and I think their goal, certainly at least in the short term, is to continue to try to build around those two and find the right mix around them. And I think, certainly with a new coach in Doc Rivers, a formula there to try to find a way to maximize them. And, Tobias Harris, who had a lot of success playing for Doc in LA, probably had his best season with him. So, I say, and those are two people who I think are pretty aligned, Doc and Daryl Morey. They worked together in Boston way back when. Daryl tried to help the Houston owner, Tillman Fertitta, hire Doc Rivers when he left the Clippers, and Doc chose the Sixer job, obviously. And so they were anxious to work with each other. And so I think those two kind of together, have they're two people who wanted to work together and now, try to figure out what is the formula to try to elevate the Sixer team back to where people thought it was headed, which was the very, very top of the East and maybe even the league.
Now, you mentioned, we're talking to the great Woj on the Comcast Business Hotline. You mentioned that, obviously, the two stars in Ben and Joe. And right away, when the people look at Daryl Morey, they go, well, he doesn't like big, so what does that mean for Embiid? And he likes shooters, and what does that mean for Simmons? How do you suppose those two when it comes to it?
Yeah, I would probably dispute the idea that he doesn't like bigs. I mean, he had a team. He was dying to trade for a star player and was able to get one in James Harden when he did the Oklahoma City trade. And that's the player they built around. So if you're going to have James Harden, you want to surround him with shooting. He draws a lot of attention and certainly is a great passer, great scorer, all of those things. And listen, they went harder after Dwight Howard in free agency, however many years ago that was. And that was an upset at the time to get him to leave the Lakers. Houston, whatever you think of Dwight and what it became for him,
sure.
At that time he was still considered a preeminent player. So I just think in Houston, they decided to try to come that they weren't going to outman that Golden State team in the West, but they said, let's see if we can find a style of play with Mike D'Antoni and Harden that just plays to a completely different strength. And that's what they did. So I don't think he doesn't value size. Certainly the three-pointer is important. And it'll be interesting to see how they use Simmons. You remember Brett Brown in the bubble before Ben got hurt, had moved him to the power forward and had, didn't have him as the primary ball handler. So it'll be interesting to see if that's what Doc comes into the season with. But they certainly, listen, almost every team in the league is always looking for shooting. That's going to be important for that team. And, but I don't think he's anti-big guy. He certainly had, listen, you remember the great Chris Paul trade that fell through. They were getting Paul Gasol in that trade. They were signing Nene. So I just think they went down a road with the talent they had that they thought was the way to go.
Is there any insight you think when it comes to Simmons as the primary facilitator? Because, he does move fast, and I think that's attractive to Daryl Morey, I would think, where he can move the ball up and down the floor. But he kind of is lost when he's at the four. I mean, it always was a belief that you need someone next to him that could be a secondary ball handler that could shoot the three. Do you kind of see that as well?
Yeah, listen, I think, Tobias Harris being able to play, he can go between the 2-4 positions, certainly. And, he's a player who, again, had his best season in LA with Doc and has played well in Philly. I think they hope they would get, that they can continue to help him improve and play at a high level consistently. The Al Horford deal, it'll be interesting because, listen, they invested a lot in Al Horford. 4 years, over $100 million. And you don't just say, well, we're going to move him on and we're going to get that becomes a difficult contract to trade. And so you become limited in what you can do just because you want to do a trade, just because you made a lot of trades. The one thing with the Sixers, they burned through assets and bringing Jimmy Butler in and then moving him on. The Tobias Harris trade, which cost you, a good young player in Landry Shamet and more draft picks. At some point, you've kind of gassed a lot of the assets. You can go back to the beginning with the Markelle Fultz draft night trade for Jason Tatum, and that gave up another pick. And so, they had a bushel of young assets and picks, and they burned through them with not enough to show for it. And so, and by the way, that's what happened in Houston at the end. Yeah. They traded multiple picks and multiple pick swaps in the Russell Westbrook trade. And so their future there is not it's fairly bleak in terms of being able to make moves. And so I don't think people should expect that Daryl's going to come in and there's some magic wand that's going to bring in players around, that they can go and land another great player, another star level player without having to move Embiid or Simmons. Wow. And I don't think that's their plan. I don't know though that there's a way to land, a third, they're paying.
That was my question.
To be that third star.
Yeah, that was my next question to you is there any way, I don't know what the Rockets plan to do now with an aging, all of a sudden you look at the Westbrook and Harden, you go, well, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to keep them? You're going to try to rebuild, but you exhausted so much resources, like you said. And is there a way to do a Horford or even a Tobias with those big contracts and take back up Chris Paul or something like that?
Well, Chris Paul would be interesting given his history with both Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey. Remember, Daryl recruited him in free agency. Technically, it was a sign and trade. Yeah. And then moved him fairly unceremoniously to Oklahoma City. I think the history of Doc's relationship with Chris in L.A. Not great at the end, not great in the middle. And so I don't know. Now, listen, I've seen a lot of, you've been around sports and you've been around the NBA, and people can make up when there's a common interest of his talent and and their need. But I don't know. You know, you look and you say, what does Philly have hypothetically
Sure.
that appeals to a rebuilding Oklahoma City team? I'm not sure I see the fit. And if you're going to try to get a third elite player, you know, your two big contracts are Tobias Harris and Al Horford. And so what does that match up? Remember, two teams have to make the trade. So again, I think they're going to have to do some things around the edges.
Gotcha.
And they're going to have to work on how they improve the system and how they're going to coach these guys. But I don't think there's a quick magical fix for this Philly team. I think a lot of it initially is going to have to come from just internal changes, improvement.
Okay, so I'll quash the Harden for Tobias Harris. And
you might want to slow down on that one, because you might want to.
Hey,
I don't know how much enthusiasm Houston's ownership would have to trade James to Daryl. Like, just send him off. Here you go, Daryl. Here's I don't know that's and they want to continue to try to win with Harden.
Sure.
In Houston, I don't think they're in any rush to move him. And listen, Harden will have some say. Start players of that caliber are going to have some say about where they get moved to, typically, especially if they're getting closer to the end of their contract, because teams want to know they can re-sign them if they trade for him.
The great Woj with us on the Comcast Business Hotline. And that was one thing I do want to ask you, is that it's a players' league. Nobody knows this better than you, and the inner workings and the political dynamics of that league. And when it comes to players that can kind of force their way and force their issue to a contending team.
Yeah, players have a lot of say in where they're going to go, and especially as guys have been willing to take shorter contracts. It's funny, the league, when they did the last collective bargaining agreement, they financially put a pretty big advantage and incentive for players to stay where they are, that they could make more money, get a bigger annual raise, be guaranteed more money to stay put if they were maxed out. And it really has not been an advantage where, you know, you can sign with your own team for 5 years, you can only get 4 years with another team. And when you look through the last several years, that hasn't helped teams really. And guys have shown a willingness to take a little less money to go where they want. And maybe sometimes endorsements can make up the difference, or certain tax laws in whatever state it is. But so, you know, players do have a lot of say in how and where they go. And, you know, that's a reality of obviously free agency. But even in doing big trades, it does limit teams who they might trade for, because if the guy's coming up on free agency, they don't want to give up a bunch of assets and then just have the guy walk out the door on them.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, I was just curious, Doc and the Clippers, because it really surprised a lot of us that all of a sudden Doc kind of fell from the sky to you know, save the Sixers in that sense. What happened there?
You know, I think it was just too difficult given the expectations of that team. And Steve Ballmer had been there as owner for a couple of these 3-1 flameouts. They're hard to recover from. They can be hard to recover from for a coach. And I just think ultimately Steve Ballmer couldn't get over that loss. He couldn't get over 3-1, that 3-1 lead to Denver, losing that series. There was a lot of anticipation in that organization, in the city, that ultimately it would be Lakers-Clippers in a conference final. And I just don't think he got past that and made the change. And so, but Doc brings a lot of credibility to Philly. I think he's really a good coach for Embiid and Ben Simmons and that group. And I think he's putting together a staff that I think is going to be put them in position to improve the team. I do. And so, you know, and I think he and Daryl together, that's a lot of force within an organization and a league. And so I will say this. I think Elton Brand, whatever he decides to do whether he decides to stay, which I know he has the option of doing, or move on, he's going to be a really good GM
yes.
in the NBA. He got thrown into it in Philly in a way very few guys. You know, one of the few comparisons I can think to Elton was Joe Dumars.
Anthony Gargano
went from his playing career to a GM role with a